Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is America's Lawyer. The criminal justice system in the United States is designed so that victims of a crime are given protection to ensure that they aren't made to be a victim twice. But like the rest of the justice system, if you're rich and powerful, the rules don't apply. Years ago, a billionaire by the name of Jeffrey Epstein was found to be running a sex trafficking operation, providing young girls who were often in their early teens for high-powered people from all over the planet. And when prosecutors finally got Epstein, they worked out a plea deal that resulted in Epstein spending a meager 13 months in jail for crimes that would put anybody else in prison for the rest of their life. The girls who were victimized by Epstein are now suing because they were kept in the dark about the plea deal, even though prosecutors were required by law to keep them informed of every step of the process. Tonight, we'll tell you the disturbing story of Jeffrey Epstein and how justice is special for American billionaires. And later in the show, I'll talk to you about how the lawyer that supported Trump's appointment of Mick Mulvaney to the CFPB represented a company that's accused of falsely threatening arrest and imprisonment of Americans who couldn't pay back financial loans. So don't go anywhere. America's Lawyer starts right now.
This is a classic whistleblower case within the pharmaceutical fraud. Is convinced by this company was that what you're doing is wrong.
The Crime Victims' Rights Act lays out the rights of victims during court proceedings and plea bargains. They have the right to be reasonably heard at any public proceeding in the district court involving releases, pleas, sentencing, or any parole proceedings. The plea deal arranged by prosecutors and approved by a federal judge in sex trafficking and pedophilia case against Jeff Epstein violated all the provisions of that law. The prosecutors claimed that they did their very best to keep the victims informed about what was happening with the plea deal, but that some of the victims were just too hard to get in touch with, or that the victims weren't cooperating enough with the prosecution. In the end, the prosecutors said that they were so desperate to get financial compensation for the 30 victims in the case that they were willing to let a man with a history of sex trafficking off the hook with what amounted to no punishment at all. There's no reason, not one reason alone why Jeffrey Epstein was let off the hook. He was a powerful billionaire. That's the real key reason, but no other reasons besides that. I've looked through the documents. I've seen his personal Rolodex, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Richard Branson, members of several different royal families throughout Europe. These connections are what helped keep Epstein out of prison for sexually victimizing and prostituting dozens of young teenage women. And for nearly a decade, attorneys in South Florida have been trying to reverse the original plea deal on the grounds that it violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act, and their case is about as tight as you could hope for. The only problem is that those same powerful connections that kept Epstein from serving a real prison sentence are still in position of power. The best hope is that now this country is finally starting to pay attention to claims of sexual assault, and they're finally willing to overlook someone's net worth and go forward with a genuine, a real prosecution.
This is a classic whistleblower case within the pharmaceutical fraud. Is convinced by this company was that what you're doing is wrong.
Joining me now to talk about this is former prosecutor Jeff Gaddy. Jeff, start by giving us a quick rundown of what the Crime Victims' Rights Act actually does for victims, if you would.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me on. Essentially, what the Act does is it recognizes that within our country, victims of crimes have rights. They have the right to be protected from the accused. They have the right to be informed about any court proceedings in their case. Maybe most importantly, they have the right to be treated with basic dignity and fairness. When it comes to plea bargaining, what that means is that they have the right to consult with the prosecutor and be informed of any potential plea bargain that is going to be offered to the offender in their case.
So, Jeff, this doesn't really affect plea deals that prosecutors make. It simply lets the victim participate in that. Did I get that right?
No, you're exactly right. Prosecutors are required by the law to allow those victims to have input into any offer that's made for the criminal offender. You're exactly right that the prosecutor retains the ultimate discretion, but the law recognizes that victims of crime have a voice. And that voice cannot be silenced by the bank account or the political connections of a criminal defendant.
So that concept was completely bulldozed over with this billionaire Jeff Epstein. Tell us what happened in the Jeff Epstein plea deal. Were the female victims really kept in the loop, and what was happening as the Crime Victims' Rights Act requires? What really happened to that act that's so important? What happened in this case?
No, Mike, they were not kept in the loop, and worse than that, their record seems to imply that they were actively misled by federal prosecutors. Months after the prosecutors entered into what has been called a sweetheart deal with Mr. Epstein, the prosecutors continued to send letters and other correspondence to these victims, telling them that the case was still under investigation, telling these women that they were continuing to pursue these charges. In fact, the deal that they struck with Mr. Epstein was kept in the dark for over 9 months. When they finally did let these victims know that Mr. Epstein would be entering a plea, they withheld a lot of the very, very pertinent details. He was entering a plea in state court. They did not tell these women that this plea would bar any federal prosecution. They left out the details of his cushy jail sentence that he received in the matter. So by no stretch of the imagination did the prosecutors follow either the letter or the spirit of the Crime Victims' Rights Act.
Well, let me put this in perspective. Dozens of teenage women, some as young as 12 years old, were put into basically a prostitution ring by Epstein. That's what he pleaded to. He said, yes, I did these things. And ordinarily, with the Crime Victims' Rights Act, you'd have input from the parents, maybe from the victims themselves, as to what the punishment should be. But here you had a billionaire who was connected to, his connections were incredible. I mean, everywhere from Bill Clinton to European royalty. And all of a sudden, this whole thing, it takes place in secret. It takes place in almost the dead of night, and the federal prosecutors said, oh, gee whiz, we tried. Well, no, if you look at this record, they really didn't. Plus, you know the lawyers down in South Florida. I know the lawyers down in South Florida who are now trying to open this case. And I've seen the documents firsthand, and I've read them about how disgusting this child prostitution ring was. And this is a guy that got 13 months where all he had to do was show up at the jail. He could walk free 16 hours a day. Now, it's not like he was in jail 24/7. All he had to do was show up and sleep there, and he was free to go 16 hours a day. Anybody else, Jeff, you were a prosecutor. You prosecuted some of the most serious felonies in this state. Have you ever heard of such a situation? This guy should have been in prison for life. What's your take?
No, you're exactly right. It's truly despicable the way that the justice system treated these women in this case. He was facing offenses that carried up to life sentences when you looked at all the offenses together, and he was given a slap on the wrist doesn't even give it due justice as far as what he received in this case. It just as despicable as the sentence he received is the lack of transparency.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Let me ask you, let's assume that this federal judge that's been sitting on this an awful long time now says, gee whiz, you know what? This isn't right. This is not in keeping with the Crime Victims' Rights Act, and I'm going to set this aside. It's not like double jeopardy attaches here, because in the plea agreement that I saw, it doesn't. This didn't attach to any conduct outside of that narrow area down there in Palm Beach. In other words, if he did this in New York, he could be prosecuted. If he did this in Europe, he could be prosecuted. If he did it out west. So it's not as if you even have to worry about a double jeopardy argument. What is your take on if this does go back to trial? All these people are terrified. His friends, Harvey Weinstein's name came up in this, no surprise there. But his friends are terrified that this is going to be that they're going to get a second chance at this. What's your take?
No, you're exactly right, Mike. I mean, the Victims' Rights Act itself specifically allows for any plea or sentence to be reopened if the victim was denied their opportunity to consult with the prosecutor. That's what happened here. I think it's very important to note that this is not a case where these women who have filed this lawsuit are after money damages. In fact, they know they're not entitled to that. They're after justice. They want to see Mr. Epstein held accountable in a proper way for the crimes that he committed. And they're after justice, and frankly, justice that seems to be long overdue.
What I think is interesting about this case, too, Jeff, is the lawyers that are handling it down in South Florida are superb lawyers. They're some of the best lawyers in the state of Florida. They're handling it pro bono. They're not getting paid to do this. They're handling this because they realize this is wrong. They see what the federal prosecutors were wrong. They're upset at the idea of this double standard of justice, where this Jeff Epstein, who could be in prison for the rest of his life, is still free to fly back and forth to the island that he owns, where some of these girls were taken down in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so there's really been no justice here, and these guys are very motivated by that. I think the chances of this being set aside are very high. What is your take if you're calling, and the facts of this case, what's your call?
Look, I'm with you. I think that it's very clear that, as I mentioned earlier, neither the letter nor the spirit of the law was followed. These women were ignored. They were treated poorly. They were not permitted to give their input into the ultimate sentence, and they should have that opportunity to voice their opinion. So I'm with you. I think that there's a high likelihood of success here, and that Mr. Epstein may ultimately have to answer for his crimes.
And if he answers what all these other characters are worried about, all these big-name celebrities and, from all over the world, what they're worried about is they're going to be pulled into it too, and they should be. I know we're using the Epstein case as an example here, but there's certainly been other high-profile cases that could be used to show how the rich and powerful get away with virtually anything. It's all part of the double justice system that we have in the United States. As a prosecutor, you were confronted with the haves, always trying to determine what the rules should be. As a prosecutor, I know you saw that firsthand. What was your pushback when somebody came to you and they said, gee whiz, this is special because we have a lot of money? I know you saw it. Give me your take on that and why we're having such a hard time with that in the United States.
Look, Mike, you're right. Unfortunately, it's a sad but true state of affairs that in many areas of this country, there's a different set of rules that applies to the rich and powerful. One of the best and things that I love most about the law is the purity of it. The fact that it should apply equally to everyone, and in the courtrooms I was in, it most certainly did. But all too often, we do see the rich and powerful get to play by another set of rules, and that's truly unfortunate.
Thanks for joining me, Jeff. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.